I want to start off the presentation just by giving a bit of context about what we're doing at Mid Devon. We have an adopted local plan for the district that was adopted in July of 2020, and that will have a lifespan through to 2033. And that plan will remain in place until it's adopted, until it's replaced by a new adopted local plan. And it will continue in that time period to bring many benefits to Mid Devon. Now, the theme of this evening's Zoom presentation is about climate change. This local plan that we already have adopted and is already in force, that is already helping to tackle the causes and effects of climate change. And there are policies within that, the current local plan, that are relevant to that. The plan also takes forward the national planning policy that we have to promote the sustainable use of energy and other resources and help achieve sustainable development. And it's there to guide multi-million-pound investment across the district. And that's just not public money, that's also private sector investing in new homes, jobs, transport infrastructure, etc. One of the main aims of the local plan is to help meet our needs, and that's need for new homes and jobs and other uses. That follows from the evidence that helps inform the local plan. But alongside that then is needing other infrastructure such as schools, transport, etc. The plan has policies to help us regenerate our town centres, and also it has policies there to protect and enhance those parts of the district where we do not wish to see unplanned development taking place. And that includes the open countryside and also high quality landscapes. So if we have a fairly recently adopted local plan, then you may well ask, well, why do we need a new local plan? There's a legal requirement to do so, and the council must complete a review of the local plan within 5 years. It takes about 5 years to prepare a local plan, and so the decision's been taken is to make a very early start in preparing a new local plan for the district. And that has a number of advantages in that we can now have regard to the latest national planning policies and guidance. The current local plan was substantially written through 2013 to 2015. And so whilst that's not too distant in the past, things have moved on in terms of updates, national planning policy. And in terms of the bullets that we got on the slide, in terms of context, there's been a lot happening over certainly the last couple of years. So we've had COVID-19 pandemic and also this country leaving the European Union. So there's a need to respond to those in terms of economic recovery and altered trading patterns with our European partners, affecting the supply and distribution of goods and services, etc. And that can filter down and have an impact in the local economy in Mid Devon. In 2019, there was a climate change declaration by Devon County Council, and Mid Devon is a signatory to that. And my colleague Jason will speak a little bit later, explaining that to you a bit further. We also have an Environment Act that's come in recently, and there will be a requirement going forward to achieve biodiversity net gain on our development sites where we identify those across the district. And then there's a prospect of reforms to the planning system, which the government has mooted. That will bite at some point throughout the next 5 years, and we will need to adapt how we're preparing a local plan to take on board those planning reforms. There will be transitional arrangements, but the advice from government to all local planning authorities is don't delay your plan preparation and get on with it, get them in place, get them adopted. So that's exactly what we're doing. We'll need refreshed evidence to inform this new plan. So it will be founded on the most recent understanding of housing need, etc., etc. So that is work that is currently in progress and will continue to do so over the next year or so as we get to the next stage of the plan. But by having a new local plan, that will ensure that Mid Devon will continue to benefit from a plan-led approach for development to meet our current and future needs over a longer time period. and it avoids having a situation where we don't have an up-to-date adopted plan, and that planning is done to us, that we end up in a situation where it's planning by appeal, and that's somewhere where we don't want to be. So that is why we're preparing a new local plan. So that sort of sets a bit of context. Now, of course, the big theme for this evening's Zoom meeting is about climate and climate change. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to my colleague Jason Ball, and he's going to talk a little bit more about what's happening with climate globally and the impact on that nationally, and some other work. So a slightly broader perspective about what Mid Devon is doing in terms of addressing climate change. I'll hand over to you now, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan. So yeah, I thought we'd start with this image. It's a painting by a local child in Mid Devon. Her vision of a net zero Tiverton. And yeah, I just thought I'd throw that question at our audience this evening. How do you imagine a greener future happening? What's it going to look like? What's going to be happening in it? What's your role going to be in that? What should our role be in that? What's the landscape going to look like? I thought that was just a really good way to start this. Next slide, please. And whoever's in control of the clicking, there's a bit of clicking to be done. So picture by picture, here's some of the things that we're doing and that we're getting involved with the community. So teaming up on things like tree planting. This is a new community orchard that was planted in December. Next picture. We've been retrofitting some of our properties. So we've got about 3,000 council homes. And this is bungalows in Lapford, where whilst they were empty, we completely did them up, improved the insulation, and installed solar panels and installed a ventilation and circulation system that not only means that the temperatures between rooms is nice and balanced and even, it also means the air is filtered, and it's a very efficient way of heating that home. We've got a picture of some of the works coming up. So that's the kind of thing that's up in the loft and circulating the air around the building. Next picture. And we've been installing solar panels in many places, not just on the council houses, but also on our main buildings. So Phoenix House, where we're based, and the leisure centre, and our depot at leisure centres, and the depot at Carley Close. And we've been arranging for more charge points to be installed around the district in partnership with other districts and the county council. We've been able to get money for that to invest in those locally, and we'll continue with that. There's a lot more to do on all of these projects. And the next one. And we've got a new website. Please do go and have a look at that. It's Sustainable Mid Devon. Just search for that, and it's easy to find. One of the things that we've been doing in that is we've published our climate strategy and our climate action plan, and giving updates about what we're doing, but also what others are doing in the community. And we've got an interactive map of all sorts of projects and resources available through Mid Devon, community champions, local sustainability groups, local food producers, all that sort of thing. And yeah. So it's all about communication as well, and sharing good information and signposting people to expertise and support, and people who can deliver what you'd like in projects, and some really interesting people and campaigners in our very district. Next. And we need to work in partnership on so many things. Connecting the Colne is a fantastic project that we've been involved with. And one of the major things that they've been working on is a vision for the Colne, thinking about the whole catchment for the River Colne, right from the Blackdown Hills AOMB and right through to the main river system, going through Clumpton and beyond. and engaging with landowners, engaging with the community, getting some citizen science running, and asking people to think about what is this future going to look like? How can we make this a green future? What can we be aiming for? What pictures can we have in our mind that we think, yes, this is what we want, and then we can decide how we're going to build on those dreams, and who we need to be part of that, and aim for a reality in a way that we want it to be, knowing what we've got to tackle in terms of climate adaptation and all the work to reduce our climate emissions. Next. So this is a list that kind of summarizes a lot of what we're doing. It's a mixture of looking at our own carbon footprint as an organization, but also helping the community and individuals to tackle their carbon footprints, and working with everyone on adaptation, and then seeking money and opportunities to be able to make those transformations a reality. And then when it comes to a local plan, it's a real opportunity then to help make sure that things are going to go in the right direction. Make sure we're putting the best ideas into practice and preparing for that, so that the policies and our vision actually is something that leads people towards what we need to happen. Next. And Devon Climate Emergency is a mixture of things, really. It's both a campaign and it's a partnership, and it also embodies a lot of action and promotes a lot of good practice around the county. We are signatories to the Devon Climate Declaration, and we're signatories to the Devon Carbon Plan. And one of the things about that is it's got fantastically strong democratic endorsement. A lot of consultation has been done on the ideas and on the priority setting. It's based on a whole set of principles that mean that things are going to be done in the right manner, but then there's a whole load of action points, which means that every aspect of what we need to be looking at is addressed. It helps partners like us as a district council and others who are a mixture of local authorities and businesses and agencies to all be on the same page, but all to help contribute to delivering what we need to achieve net zero, as well as the climate adaptation that we've mentioned already. Next. And we're going to talk a bit more. I'll hand over soon to Tristan again, to think about why there's the need for the climate focus in a local plan. I think we'll all be aware of factors like this. In the latest risk assessment report by the government, it's saying, okay, although we're trying to aim for 1.5 degrees Celsius and not get above that, we've got to be prepared for what might happen, and so we've got to invest and understand what we're trying to tackle. It's not a future thing. Climate change is already with us. Temperatures have already changed. You know, what's happening to our countryside, what's happening with the timing of things like flowering, pollination, wildlife waking up from hibernation, all of that is already changing, and it has huge implications. So amongst the top economic impacts predicted, most of those are about soils, ecosystems, wildlife, biodiversity, and the effects on those ecosystems. And of course, if we've got less resilient ecosystems, if the function is affected, then that means we're not going to be able to use those soils, the landscape, to our benefit in the same way that we do now. So those impacts hit us just as much as they hit the wild ecosystems. That's what we rely on at the end of the day. But there are also huge impacts potentially on health, well-being, and supply chains, interruptions to power supply. There's so much to consider. And although there are plans in place and action being taken already, there's a very strong case for doing things more intensely and more rapidly than we already are. Next. And this is something you might want to go and have a look at after this presentation or at some other point. It's a really cool tool online on openclimatedata.net. If you look for the climate spirals or do a search for those, this is an interactive graphic. When you find it, it starts playing through and it shows you almost like a clock face of the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere increasing and increasing. If you can pause it on the year that you were born and then pause it again in 2019 when we made our climate declaration, and think about the difference in the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, and you'll get an idea of just how rapidly it has changed even in your lifetime. And towards the 8 o'clock part of that clock, it shows you where we would be hitting 1.5 degrees Celsius impact, and further up on the clock, the 2 degrees Celsius impact. So yeah, it gives you an idea of how quickly things are changing and how urgent it is for us to slow that down. Next. And I'll hand over to Tristan.
Thank you, Jason. Well, that's given a rather sort of compelling picture about the rapidity that our climate is changing, and some of the critical thresholds in terms of temperature that we need to avoid at all costs if possible. So what I want to do now is, with that sort of context in mind, is sort of draw it back into the relevance to the planning process and the work that we're doing in Plan Mid Devon. And then what will follow from that is we want to take you through a series of slides, each one relating to different themes. So, for example, a theme on biodiversity, a theme on infrastructure, etc., just to tease out the relevance of climate change to our thinking about planning, and what's relevant for a new local plan. And these are things that are picked up in passing through the issues paper. So we're bringing those together under the theme of climate for this evening's presentation. So why the need for a climate focus? And that's in relation to the work we're doing on a new local plan. Well, firstly, there's a legal requirement to do so. It's set out in statute. It's the Planning and Poultry Purchase Act 2004 as amended. And that makes clear that to ensure that, taken as a whole, plan policy contributes to the mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. So, you know, that legal requirement's been around for a while. It's not new, and that's there in statute. So that's legislation, and that's law. Stemming from that, we have the National Planning Policy Framework, and that essentially is the national rule book, as it were, for planning and plan making in this country. And there's a section 14 in that document that is specific about climate change. So it's there. It's been elevated up as the NPPFs have been revised and republished. But that's quite clear in national planning policy that it's something that we must have regard to. And then very recently, of October last year, there was a publication published by the Town and Country Planning Association and the Royal Town Planning Institute. And those are the two leading professional bodies in this country for the planning profession. So collectively, they've produced a document called The Climate Crisis, and it's a guide. It's aimed at local authorities on planning for climate change. But that's influential in our thinking because we have regard to it as professional planners. And within it, there are three key messages, and those are on this slide. So the first is that ensuring that tackling the climate crisis is at the heart of the vision for the future of our communities. And also then to recognise how vital planning is to securing that vision. And it then talks about facilitating, for example, renewable energy generation, and practical nature-based solutions, design actions, etc., etc. And so those are some of the themes that I'm going to pick up in a moment on the next few slides. And then finally, that many of the actions needed that are necessary to tackle the climate crisis are also key in helping to achieve what we need to do in planning. So this is creating healthy, ecologically rich, prosperous and beautiful places for us. So we can't do that effectively until we've got on top of tackling climate change. So this is quite a fundamental message now that's coming out from the two lead organisations for planning in this country. And that has really affected our thinking in terms of how we're going to tee up the work going forward for a new local plan. So the Plan Mid Devon Issues paper, what we have put in that our response is that we will have 6 top priorities for Mid Devon, and at the top end of those priorities, the overarching one will be priority 1, responding to the climate emergency and moving to a net zero carbon future. So that's our overarching priority, and under that priority then will be 5 others, which are doing what we need to do in planning. So we're delivering development in infrastructure, addressing housing affordability and improving choice, protecting and enhancing the natural and built environment, and respecting environmental limits. Priority 5 is improving our health and well-being, and then priority 6, because Mid Devon is predominantly rural, we've got an emphasis there on supporting rural vitality and a prosperous rural economy. So within the issues paper then, alongside those priorities, we have 17 chapters, and those chapters explore those priorities in more detail, and they're relevant to the future planning of Mid Devon. So our ability to mitigate the effects of climate change and move towards a net zero carbon future is relevant to being able to achieve many of these. And I say that we've taken that directly from the publication of October last year that I've just referred to on the previous slide. So that's our response. We believe it's the right one, but we put it in the issues paper, and the whole purpose of that is to seek your views. Have we got it right? Have we missed anything? Are there issues that we haven't identified that you think are important to the future planning of Mid Devon? So what we're going to do this evening then, as I say, is take those themes and unpick them in a bit more information, how in terms of where they're relevant to climate change and moving towards net zero carbon. So the first slide we have is renewable energy, and that's important in that there's the ability for local authorities to require a proportion of the energy needed related to new development to be sourced in the locality of the development through renewable or low carbon generation. So we can do that. And that can include in Mid Devon solar, so solar panels, wind, that could be wind turbines, hydro. We have a project in progress which is trying to harness some of the energy of the River Exe that flows through Tiverton to help generate electricity, I think principally for the council's own buildings, but nevertheless it's a sort of a pilot scheme, so we can do hydro in Mid Devon. And there are also other technologies. One of those that we have is anaerobic digesters. I think we've got 6 of those in Mid Devon, where biomass generates heat and then energy as well. So some of the issues around this is that whilst renewable energy is a good thing, and it's very green, there are some planning issues around it that we need to be mindful of. One is landscape sensitivity, and you can see from the image there, it's a bit of Marmite, I guess, for many people, is that some people like it and some don't, with wind turbines spreading across the countryside, and the same, I guess, for solar panels. So we have to have regard to landscape sensitivity, and in preparing a new local plan, part of the evidence work will be doing a review of the landscape character of the district. That will identify the most sensitive areas, and then we can use that to help inform any policy that we may want to put into the plan in where we may wish to guide renewable energy technologies. So that it's our gift to do that within the local plan, and that will be subject to further stages of plan making, consultation, and decision making by the council. So, but the potential's there. Other issues are the ability to connect the renewable energy source to the national grid. It's not possible everywhere, so there are certain constraints. And other issues, there are transport movements. We know with the anaerobic digestive systems that we've got in mid-Devon that there's an issue with the transporting of biomass to these facilities, and then waste materials as well, and surface lagoons. So there are issues. And also transport in relation to servicing. You may need vehicles to get to service the wind turbines, etc. And these are introducing traffic movements into a predominantly rural area. Energy efficient buildings and design. The Planning and Energy Act sets powers for local planning authorities to set energy efficiency standards that exceed the energy requirements of the building regulations. Now, so that's an opportunity. The current big building regulations, Part L, is about the conservation of fuel and power. There is a Part F that's about ventilation. So whilst, yes, the council could explore setting higher energy efficient standards, there is work by the government to bring in what it aspires to be a future home standard, and bring that in by 2025. And what that will do is that will review and bring changes to the Part L and Part F of the building regulations. That's to do with conservation of fuel and power and ventilation. And then we'll raise the standards for the average new home. So they'll be built, and the aim is to have 75 to 80% less carbon emissions than one built to the current energy efficient requirements that are set by the building regulations. So that is likely to take place within the time frame of preparing a new local plan, and therefore that's something that we can have regard to in the framing of our policies in the new local plan. Other ways that we can make our places more energy efficient is through the design of places. So that could be the urban form, the spatial layout of neighbourhoods, making them perhaps more compact, or the orientation of buildings, make them south facing with fewer windows or smaller windows on north facing aspect of buildings. So there are other ways of tackling energy efficiency, and it's not just about the building materials used and the insulation, but it's also about the design of places. And then also we can apply the nationally recognised whole life cycle carbon methodology to scrutinise planning applications as they're submitted to the council, to make sure that the developer has taken that on board as part of their development proposals. The images on the right-hand side of the slide show some modern methods of construction, and that is one of the ways forward in terms of getting homes delivered more quickly, and also to very high environmental standards. And those high environmental standards can be maintained rigorously because they are factory produced new homes that are rigorously, the standards are rigorously applied. So that's energy efficiency of buildings and design. Another key way is through the planning process, is by having greener travel and reducing the need to travel. Now, there's a number of ways that we can do that through planning, but principally one of the most interesting ones that we want to look at for the new local plan is this concept of 20-minute neighbourhoods, where people should be able to access their daily needs within a short distance of their homes. And we know through recent experience with the lockdowns through COVID-19 is that it's meant that people have begun to realise the value of having a local shop and not being able to use the car. And I think that's sort of, we can sort of hang on to that the memories of those lockdowns and thinking, well actually, it actually worked quite well having things very close to hand, to shops and services. So 20-minute neighbourhood is something that's coming out of the Garden Village work, but it can be applied more widely in other developments as well. So we've mentioned that in the issues paper, and we very much sort of welcome your thoughts about that. So that's reduced need to travel by private car. Our developments, we try and make sure that there is a bus service provision to them on our urban extensions. And in terms of walking and cycling, we try and make sure that there is designed in good connectivity in terms of footpaths and cycleways. Electric vehicle charge points, we have our own parking standards for new developments and a requirement for electric vehicle charge points in new buildings. We can hopefully move to a point where, excuse me, that every new home, there's a requirement through the planning process for an electric vehicle charge point. So that's something that we can sort of ramp up the requirements of for parking provision in our local plan. So moving on, connectivity, so broadband and mobile. Now, again, accentuated through the COVID-19 pandemic, through people working from home more, and an increase in online shopping, is that it's sort of accentuated the use of doing things online, and therefore an increased reliance on fast, reliable digital connectivity. Now, what we're trying to do in this slide is explain that, yes, that's important, but there are issues in terms of where we're at Mid Devon, and is that Mid Devon is behind other similar rural districts in terms of the connections that it has in broadband. So, for example, 20.8% of connections are less than 30 megabytes in comparison with East Devon, which is just over 10, Teameridge also, and Exeter, which is 3.6%. So you can see that Mid Devon is well behind, and also it's a particular issue in rural parts of the district. So the map on the bottom right hand side of your screen, you can see graphically there where there are very poor areas with very poor internet speed, and the higher internet speeds are typically around the main towns. So it's not an even internet speed across the district, and that's something that where we can, we will look to address through Plan Mid Devon. So where development is proposed, then we will look to future-proof that through making sure that ducting is provided to get the broadband connection to it. That's open access, so that it's not just there for one provider, whether it's Virgin or whoever, that it's open to all fibre providers. And also that we try and coordinate the putting in of the ducting, so with the planning of new roads, etc. So it's dig once, so we're not digging up roads and pavements to put in the infrastructure. So that's something that we can do through the local plan, and we can work with the utilities providers for telecommunications to help make that work and work well. So broadband and mobile connectivity is very important. We need to raise the bar in Mid Devon, and I think that the probability is that going forward we will continue to see a much more sort of prevalence of people working from home, online commerce, etc., etc. Green infrastructure. Now this is relevant to climate because for a number of reasons, and the slide, we've tried to tease out some of those. There's a lot of water in Mid Devon, although it's not coastal, through the Exe and the Colne in particular. And that brings with it the risk of flooding. And of course, with climate change, we are more susceptible to extreme weather events, very high levels of rainfall, and that needs to go somewhere. And invariably then that it can increase flood risk. So Mid Devon has suffered serious flooding in the past, and it's likely to increase in the future as a result of climate change. In terms of our future planning, we need to make sure that we are planning for new development outside of areas at flood risk. So approximately 6% of the district is classified as flood zone 2 and or 3. So those are areas of flood risk. And that's particularly around Newton St Sires, Bampton, the main towns of Tiverton and Clumpton, and also in Hemyock to the northeast of the district. So winter rainfall is predicted to increase by 15 to 30% by the 2080s. So you can see that that's just going to bring more water into mid Devon along those main rivers, and we need to have regard to that in parts of the districts that are alongside those watercourses. So it's a big thing. The other aspects of green infrastructure is that it can include parks and historic gardens and linear green corridors, etc. But those elements of green infrastructure can have a role in mitigating the effects of climate change, particularly in urban areas. So if we introduce green spaces into our main towns, for example, that can stop them overheating in the peak season in the summer when we have heat waves, because of course the sun heats up tarmac and bricks and buildings, etc., and that sort of can pool into those built up areas and then raise the heat levels even more. So by having green spaces, by having trees that generate shade, by having grassed areas, that can absorb the heat and reduce the heat island effect that we have. Also, by planting, this is tree planting and green areas, that can help capture carbon, so through sequestration and in generating new habitats. So if we've got sort of wetland as part of landscaping in urban extensions, that can also help absorb carbon dioxide. So green infrastructure, it's good there for open space, for recreation, for the health and well-being, but it's there, it can also be beneficial from a climate change perspective. This slide is about biodiversity and ecosystems. Jason's already alluded to it earlier in the presentation, but with climate change, that can affect adversely our biodiversity. So we have, for example, a loss of pollinators that can adverse impact on food generation and supply. We can lose species due to higher temperatures and drier areas, and by affecting the ecosystem that we have, that can bring a higher susceptibility to pests and disease. And I don't know whether Jason wants to elaborate on that, but that is broadly where we're at. And of course, that can impact on human health. So we need to, there are a number of reasons then why biodiversity is important from a climate perspective. So what can we do? Well, I've mentioned the value of green infrastructure, but, and we've seen earlier in one of the slides, we've referred to biodiversity net gain. So through the planning process, through Plan Mid Devon, is trying to introduce more green space in and around our built up areas, bodies of water, planting, etc. That can all help diversify the flora and fauna that we have, and could be a big benefit in terms of trying to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, I think that's right. This slide really just emphasizes some of the mechanisms of how things are affected. But yeah, I think that point you just made about the benefits that we can get from making sure that we look after the green areas, and as we try to address things like climate adaptation, when we're thinking on a landscape scale, then as well as it helping us to survive and thrive, in the way that we need to, the very last point there, nature recovery networks, one of the legislative changes is that we'll have to come up with a nature recovery strategy, and then like I say, thinking on a landscape scale, that then takes us on to the next slide, really, because so much of what we gain is also going to be about our health and well-being.
Thanks, Jason. Health and well-being is very important. For those that are not aware, the origins of the planning system in this country fell out of the Public Health Acts that in the 19th century, and the need to improve the environment of the large urban areas that were springing up through the Industrial Revolution, the poor sanitation, and the prevalence of cholera and typhoid. So the need to improve the nature of the built environment was sort of the origins of the town and country planning system in this country as we know it. So things are coming full circle. Health and well-being has been since its origins has become somewhat divorced from the thinking around land use planning, but it's very much now coming back into the thinking in terms of the quality of our environment, both built and natural, is an important determinant of public health. We need to rethink that in how we plan our places to make them more healthy. So why is that relevant to climate change, or in terms of design of places then, is that more extreme weather events, and we've mentioned about flooding, heat waves and impact on air quality, well, all of those can affect health. You know, flood risk clearly is a risk to life, but heat waves that can impact on various parts of our communities, particularly those where people that are vulnerable, like those with underlying health conditions, asthma, for example, and older age groups as well. And we know in Mid-Devon that there is a growing aged population. So in the ages 65 to 84, that age group, that's growing by 23% from 2021 to 2040. And the age group of 85 plus, this is the very elderly part of our community, nearly doubling in that period. So you've got an increasingly aging population, and that's precisely the part of the community that is most vulnerable to some of the extreme weather events that we have, where we have particularly the rising temperatures. Also, rising temperature that can create, I've mentioned heat islands, but also airborne pollution. So you have particulates in the atmosphere from vehicles, etc., and that can hang around longer in higher temperatures and exacerbate respiratory and cardiovascular illness. So climate change's impacts on health in a number of ways. We've mentioned about pests and infectious diseases, and food production systems under increased pressure. Of course, we need the food because there's healthy food, fruit and vegetables that get grown locally as well. So there is a health and well-being element to needing to get on top of climate change to mitigate the effects of it and adapt to it as well. Economy, clearly the extreme weather events then also have an effect on our economy. So agriculture, it can lead to crop failure, a loss of pasture for arable, and a lack of biomass and risk to soil health. And then more broadly on other economic sectors, then extreme weather events can disrupt transport networks and power supplies, affecting the supply and distribution of goods and services, etc. So it can have a big impact on economy, and we again, that's a good reason why we need to, as I say, get on top of climate change. And so through Plan Mid-Devon, it's this issue of resilience. It's planning for development in locations and in ways that are resilient to the effects of climate change. So that's I've been through a series of slides, and Jason's come in as well, that are sort of thematic. They're all things that we do in terms of thinking about how we're going to plan the future of our area. But hopefully we've given you an insight into the relevance of those in the context of a climate emergency and the need to mitigate climate change and adapt to it. We've got 2 or 3 more slides, and this is really pulling the presentation back into the actual consultation that we're doing. So we're consulting on 3 documents. The issues paper, known as regulation issues, is very much about the issues, about what we need to plan for and think about for Mid-Devon. The 2 others, we have a sustainability appraisal, which is a legal requirement. Well, it's actually from the European directive, which is now part of the current UK law for strategic environmental assessment, and that is within sustainability appraisal. And what that does is that tests the local plan. Excuse me for a moment. I do apologise for that. The sustainability appraisal is a means for testing the local plan to make sure that as we develop the plan, as we draft our policies and proposals and identify site allocations, that we're doing that to achieve sustainable development. And so that's very much a process, and it's iterative. And what we've got for consultation at this point in time is a scoping report about sustainability appraisal. Have we identified the right objectives on which to test the emerging local plan? There will be future stages of sustainability appraisal that will accompany the later stages of the plan, and I'll come on to those in the next slide. We also have a qualities impact assessment screening report, and that's as part of our public sector equality duty, is to make sure that we have regard to all parts of the community in terms of how we prepare the local plan, in terms of process, but also in terms of the impact of the policies within it. So it's to make sure that it's fair and equitable and doesn't adversely impact a part of the community. So the issues paper has within it 58 questions, and responses are welcome to any of those that you wish to answer. You don't need to answer all of them, but please do answer those that you would like to. We very much look forward to receiving your responses to those to help us on this journey that we're on now for preparing the new local plan. And just to make clear that at this point in time, it is very much about issues. We're not making important decisions now about the local plan, although we think we've got right the 6 objectives. But there's a lot more technical work needed over the next couple of years to get us to the point of a draft policies and site options document, so that the aim is to have that published in the summer of next year. And then in the following year, there'll be a draft plan. So one is, as its name suggests, it's draft and its options. Again, it's not set in stone, but it will give an indication as to what could go into a local plan and the sites that might be put forward for development. And then in middle of 2024, that will be our sort of final draft plan before we submit that to the Secretary of State for examination. Now, the timetable then, as I've already alluded to, we're here for the issues consultation, draft policies and site options, middle of next year. In the middle of the following year, then the publication draft plan, and then we aim then to submit that to the Secretary of State in the late summer, autumn of 2024. And then there'll be a public examination with an inspector appointed by the Secretary of State, through the Planning Inspectorate, sorry, in late 2024 through into May 25. And then we hope that we will be in a position then to adopt the new local plan in July 2025. And that's when it will then replace the current local plan that's in force. So it's a bit of a journey over the next 4 or 5 years. It will take that long to do. But that is the opportunity that we've got in that time, is to take forward the very latest thinking about how to mitigate the effects of climate change and adapt to it through planning policy in the context of Mid-Devon. So we really have, we put it on a slide earlier, it's a gift of opportunity now to be able to do this. And we really welcome all members of the community to come forward and have their say and help us on that, so that we can get the best plan that we can to take us forward that has regard to climate change. So the consultation we've got is 8 weeks. It runs to the 28th of March. There's more information on our website at www.middevon.gov.uk. So we have the 3 consultation documents I've referred to. We have 1 video presently on there, which is our Councillor Richard Chesterton, who's a cabinet member for planning and economic regeneration. We have another video which will be placed online shortly, and it's our intention to put some further videos on as well. We also have story maps, which is a more interactive version of the issues paper. where it's a bit like a Kindle, where you scroll down the page with the issues paper text, and the images change as you go along. We have a presence on Facebook, and we will update that with news about the preparing Plan Mid Devon as we go on. And so it's not just now, that will take place as we go through the various stages of plan making. And then online events. So we've had one so far open public Zoom session. There's another one next Monday. This is the first of 2 public Zoom sessions that are topic based. So tonight's on climate change, and next week we have one that focuses on housing. And with the government's removal of Plan B restrictions in relation to the virus, we're now able to prepare for 3 face-to-face drop-in events. So we're going to have one of those each at the 3 main towns, Tiverton, Clumpton, Crediton. They will take place at the end of this month and running into early March, where anybody can come along and ask questions from planning officers about the work that we're doing for Plan Mid Devon. So information about those events will be published on our website, and there'll probably be a press release as well once we know exactly when and where they will take place. So that is the end of our presentation.